When people ask, do narcissists know they're narcissists? It's rarely just an abstract question. In fact, the question is often loaded with emotional history, personal confusion, and a deep yearning for clarity. This isn't usually about academic curiosity or psychological trivia. It's about trying to make sense of pain. More often than not, the person asking has spent time, months, maybe years, in a relationship, whether romantic, familial, or professional, with someone who repeatedly displays narcissistic traits. Someone who monopolizes conversations, who twists stories to their advantage, who never seems to truly apologize or own their mistakes. Someone who manipulates without seeming to notice, or maybe even without seeming to care. And that leaves you with a haunting uncertainty. Are they doing this on purpose? Do they realize how damaging their behavior is? Are they just incapable of empathy, or are they choosing to ignore the harm they cause? These are not small questions. They're questions about the core of the relationship, and more importantly, about whether change is possible. Because if a narcissist does understand their behavior, if they are truly self-aware, then continuing the same patterns can feel almost malicious. On the other hand, if they genuinely don't realize what they're doing, there might still be hope. Maybe if you explain it the right way, or wait long enough, or love them hard enough, they will finally understand. So when people ask whether narcissists know what they are, they're not just asking for insight, they're asking for a roadmap. Should I keep trying? Should I walk away? Is there any chance this person will ever see what they're doing? Deep down, the question is rooted in a painful kind of hope, the kind that clings to the idea that maybe, just maybe, they aren't beyond reach. But before we can talk about what narcissists know or don't know, we need to define what knowing even means. This is a subtle but crucial distinction. Most people assume that awareness means being able to describe a behavior. For example, if someone says, "Yeah, I can be a bit self-centered," or "I know I like to be in control," we take that as a sign of insight. But that's not real self-awareness. Real self-awareness isn't just about being able to name a trait. It's about seeing it as it's happening, recognizing the impact it has on other people, and being emotionally connected to that impact. True self-awareness includes discomfort. It includes a willingness to sit with the reality of how your behavior affects those around you. That's what's so often missing in narcissism. Narcissists may have an intellectual understanding of certain behaviors. In fact, some narcissists are extremely well-versed in psychology. They might know all the right terms, they might even watch videos about narcissism, or read books on emotional intelligence. But knowledge isn't ownership. They can describe the traits of a narcissist with eerie precision and still not see themselves in those descriptions. Or if they do, they rationalize it. And that's where self-justification comes in. Narcissists are experts at rewriting their own stories. In their minds, their behavior is always logical, always justified. If they raise their voice, it's because you provoked them. If they ignore your boundaries, it's because your boundaries were unreasonable. If they forget your birthday, it's because they were under a lot of stress and you're too sensitive for being upset. There is always a reason that makes them the misunderstood hero or the unjustly attacked victim. And because this internal narrative is so strong, they often genuinely believe it. This is the key to understanding why the answer to "do narcissists know they're narcissists?" is so complicated. It's not just about having the facts, it's about what the mind does with those facts. And the narcissistic mind is wired for protection. It's constantly running defense mechanisms that shield the ego from shame, guilt, or vulnerability. These defenses aren't chosen consciously, they're automatic, almost like reflexes. And the more you push a narcissist to face uncomfortable truths, the more those defenses kick in. Two of the most common defense mechanisms in narcissism are denial and projection. Denial means they simply reject any version of events that doesn't fit their self-image. That never happened. You're remembering it wrong. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Projection goes a step further. It means assigning their own unwanted traits to someone else. If they're being selfish, they accuse you of not considering their needs. If they're being controlling, suddenly you're the one who's manipulative. It's a psychological sleight of hand that allows them to maintain the illusion of being blameless. And this illusion is vital to them. Because underneath the arrogance and entitlement often lies a deeply fragile sense of self. Narcissism isn't just about grandiosity, it's about protecting a wounded core. That's why criticism feels like an attack, and why even gentle feedback can provoke rage, withdrawal, or deflection. Narcissists aren't defending their behavior, they're defending their identity. To admit fault would be to admit weakness, and that feels intolerable. So what does this mean for those in relationships with narcissists? It means that the behavior you're seeing isn't just a choice. It's part of a psychological structure designed to maintain a sense of superiority while avoiding emotional pain. And that makes real change incredibly difficult. Because for narcissists to grow, they would have to face the very things they've spent their lives avoiding: shame, vulnerability, imperfection. You might catch glimpses of self-awareness, a passing joke about being self-centered, a vague acknowledgement of past mistakes. These moments can feel hopeful, but they're often surface level, more about appearing self-aware than actually being self-aware. They're intellectual nods, not emotional reckonings. And without that deeper emotional connection, those glimpses rarely lead to real change. So, do narcissists know they're narcissists? Maybe in theory, maybe in the most superficial sense, but not in the way that leads to accountability, empathy, or growth. Not in the way that changes relationships or repairs harm. For most narcissists, the story they tell themselves about who they are is simply too important to rewrite. And unless that story changes, the behavior won't either. That's the painful truth at the heart of this question. And that's why the real work isn't about changing them. It's about seeing the situation clearly enough to decide what you need to do for your own well-being. Because sometimes the answer isn't waiting for someone else to wake up. Sometimes it's waking up to the fact that they won't. To really understand whether narcissists know they're narcissists, we need to take a closer look at the nature of self-awareness. Most people assume that if someone can describe a behavior or recite a definition from a psychology textbook, then they must be self-aware. But self-awareness is not about repeating terms or sounding insightful. It is about the lived ability to observe your own patterns, recognize the impact of your actions in real time, and more importantly, to take responsibility for the emotional consequences those actions have on others. This is precisely where the illusion of narcissistic self-awareness falls apart. Many narcissists are, in fact, highly articulate. They can dissect psychological concepts with ease. Some even develop a surface-level fluency in therapeutic language. They might joke about how they love attention or acknowledge that they can be a little self-centered. They can even name-drop terms like gaslighting, projection, and emotional manipulation in conversations. To an outsider, it can sound like introspection, but it's not. These references are often intellectual shields. They're clever strategies to avoid accountability. A narcissist might say, "Yeah, I can be intense in relationships," but only to quickly pivot to why it's your fault they had to be that way. "I only lash out because you push me." The acknowledgement is never followed by real change because the core insight hasn't penetrated the emotional layer. Real self-awareness requires emotional reckoning, not just verbal admission. It involves sitting with discomfort, experiencing guilt, and holding yourself accountable without immediately rationalizing or deflecting. That's a step most narcissists are fundamentally unwilling or psychologically unable to take. Their entire self-concept is constructed to avoid shame at all costs. Shame to a narcissist is not just painful, it's identity-shattering. And this is where defense mechanisms come into play. Narcissists rely heavily on psychological defenses to keep their self-image intact. Chief among these are denial and projection. Denial allows them to completely ignore or distort facts that threaten their image. You might point out a cruel remark or a selfish decision, and they'll say, "That never happened," or "You're being too sensitive." It's not just lying, it's self-protection. Their mind simply refuses to absorb evidence that doesn't fit their narrative. Projection, on the other hand, is more aggressive. It doesn't just dismiss your feelings, it makes them your fault. If you try to express hurt or set a boundary, suddenly you're the controlling one. If you call out their lack of empathy, you become the one who's emotionally cold. This tactic is especially disorienting. It makes you question your own reality. Over time, you start to feel like you're the problem, like maybe you are too needy or too sensitive or too intense. And that's the trap. Their lack of self-awareness becomes your psychological burden. These defenses aren't accidental, they're strategic. They're embedded in how the narcissist processes the world. Their internal script is always running. I'm the victim. I'm the exception. I'm always justified. Even when they do something undeniably harmful, their mind will find a way to rewrite the story, so they emerge as misunderstood or provoked. Now, to complicate things further, many narcissists have moments where they appear to be self-aware. They might say, "I know I have some flaws," or share a story from their past that makes them look vulnerable. And sometimes it seems like they really do see themselves. You might hear them say, "I guess I was pretty difficult in that relationship," or "I have a tendency to dominate conversations." But what's crucial to understand is that these moments often lack emotional depth. They are performances of insight, not actual transformations. There's a difference between recounting a behavior and feeling the weight of it. True self-awareness comes with remorse, accountability, and behavioral change. The narcissist might show you the mirror, but they never really look into it. Or if they do, they turn away before anything real settles in. These so-called confessions are often used to reset the relationship dynamic. You feel hopeful again, like maybe this time things will change. But more often than not, the cycle continues: harm, acknowledgement, deflection, and repetition. One reason this illusion is so convincing is because narcissists are often charming and intelligent. Their ability to mimic emotional depth can be uncanny. They know how to say the right things. They might even cry or appear deeply reflective, but watch closely. Is the change sustainable? Do the apologies come with changed behavior or just better rationalizations? This is where many people get stuck, hoping that the next moment of vulnerability is the beginning of a breakthrough. But real change is never just verbal, it's behavioral, consistent, and felt. So when we ask, do narcissists know they're narcissists? The answer gets more complicated. They might know the traits, They might be able to list them and even laugh about them. But true self-awareness, the kind that leads to growth, humility, and accountability, remains just out of reach. Not because they lack intelligence, but because their entire psychological framework is designed to avoid it. This understanding changes everything. It shifts the question from how do I get them to see it to why do I keep needing them to? Because the more energy you spend trying to break through, the more entangled you become in their defenses. The focus has to turn inward. The real question is no longer about their awareness, but about your boundaries. In part 3, we'll dive deeper into how these defense patterns develop and why narcissists are often more fragile than they seem. We'll also explore how this dynamic keeps you locked in place, waiting, explaining, hoping, while they stay protected inside their psychological fortress. To be continued, understanding why narcissists cannot truly see themselves as they are requires a deep dive into the psychological defenses that maintain their fragile sense of self. Defense mechanisms are unconscious mental processes we all use to shield ourselves from emotional pain and protect our self-esteem. But in narcissism, these defenses become hardened and extreme, transforming from flexible coping strategies into rigid walls that guard against vulnerability at all costs. For the average person, defense mechanisms may be subtle and shifting. Sometimes we rationalize our mistakes. Sometimes we face uncomfortable truths and grow from them. In contrast, narcissists wield their defenses like weapons, with an almost military precision. Their psychological walls are topped with vigilant sentries, always alert to any threat of shame, guilt, or weakness. Denial and projection are the most prominent of these defenses, and they operate relentlessly. Denial is the refusal to accept facts or reality because they are too painful. When confronted with their harmful behavior, a narcissist often dismisses the claim outright, responding with statements like, "That never happened," "You're exaggerating," or "You're just being too sensitive." This denial isn't simply stubbornness. It's an essential shield that protects their self-image from collapse. Admitting fault feels like an existential threat. It threatens to unravel the carefully constructed narrative of superiority and control they rely on to function. Projection, on the other hand, is more insidious. The narcissist doesn't just deny their flaws, they accuse others of having those very faults. If you call out their lack of empathy, they might suddenly claim that you are cold or uncaring. If you set a boundary, they label you as controlling or unreasonable. This projection flips reality upside down, placing the blame squarely on the person trying to hold the narcissist accountable. It is a powerful way to evade responsibility and maintain their grandiose self-image. These defense mechanisms are not random. They emerge from a deeply fragile core. Behind the arrogance and self-absorption lies a profound insecurity, a gnawing sense of not being good enough. This hidden wound is so painful that the narcissist's mind will contort reality again and again to avoid feeling it. The grandiosity, entitlement, and victimhood narratives are all attempts to create a psychological fortress that excludes vulnerability. The idea of admitting error or weakness is not just uncomfortable, it is unbearable. This is why feedback rarely penetrates a narcissist's defenses. The more you push for self-awareness, the more their defenses ramp up. You might present undeniable evidence, but it is met with minimization, mockery, denial, or outright character assassination. You quickly realize that attempting honest dialogue feels like speaking two different languages. On one side is someone seeking truth and connection. On the other is a mind designed to repel discomfort at all costs. Until those defenses weaken, which almost never happens without a major loss or crisis, the possibility of genuine self-awareness is virtually zero. This is why many relationships with narcissists remain stuck in painful cycles of hope, disappointment, and confusion. The narcissist may occasionally show glimpses of insight, perhaps making a joke about their self-absorption or acknowledging past mistakes in a detached way. But these are intellectual acknowledgments, not emotional reckonings. It's important to distinguish these moments clearly. When a narcissist says, "Yeah, maybe I was a bit much," or "I can be self-absorbed sometimes," it may sound like progress. But it's often a performance, an effort to appear self-aware without feeling the deep impact of their behavior. They might observe their actions from a distance, like a character in a story, without connecting emotionally to the harm caused. This detachment allows them to maintain their self-image intact. Many people hold on to these fleeting moments of apparent insight as proof that change is possible. They believe if a narcissist can recognize their flaws, even humorously, there must be hope for growth. But true psychological growth is not just intellectual, it requires emotional engagement. It demands sitting with discomfort, feeling remorse, and allowing one's self-image to be challenged and reshaped. For most narcissists, this process is intolerable. The price of real self-awareness is ego death, the willingness to dismantle the protective narrative that shields them from pain. Instead, these glimpses of insight are folded back into the existing narrative as proof of their uniqueness or superiority. "I can admit my flaws, so I'm not that bad," they tell themselves. "I'm self-aware enough to joke about it, so I'm better than others who refuse to see their faults." If you find yourself clinging to these moments of apparent self-awareness, it's crucial to ask, do they lead to meaningful change, or do they simply reset the cycle? Does the narcissist follow up an admission with a new behavior, or do they slip back into denial, hurt, deflection, and repetition? Understanding this pattern is vital to breaking free from the trap of hope and disappointment. So, what is the bottom line? Do narcissists know they are narcissists? The answer is almost always no, in the way that truly matters. Intellectually, they may be able to recite the traits and recognize behaviors on a superficial level, but genuine felt recognition is nearly non-existent. Their psychological survival depends on remaining blind to their faults. Their self-concept is built on the belief that they are exceptional, justified, or even victims, not the problem. This means that waiting for a narcissist to have a breakthrough of self-awareness is usually a fruitless endeavor. You cannot argue someone into insight if their mind is wired to reject it. Every honest conversation, every confrontation is filtered through their defenses and ultimately dismissed or distorted. The narcissist keeps running the same playbook, sometimes for years or decades. This is not a failure of your communication or your compassion. It's a function of their psychological makeup. Real self-recognition requires a fundamental shift, a surrender of the self-protective stories that keep them safe. For most narcissists, this is a price they are unwilling to pay. For those who have been caught in the orbit of a narcissist, this understanding can be both devastating and liberating. It means that your energy is better spent not on trying to reform or rescue the narcissist, but on protecting yourself. Setting clear boundaries, gaining clarity about what is possible, and reclaiming your own life become the acts of self-preservation you need. Accepting the limits of change, grieving the fantasy of who the narcissist could be, and turning your attention back to your own growth are the healthiest steps forward. Ultimately, understanding narcissism is less about changing the other person and more about freeing yourself. It's about seeing reality clearly, without the distortion of hope or denial, so that you can reclaim your power and heal. Because no matter what happens with someone else, the power to heal, to grow, and to move forward rests with you. After unraveling the intricate and often painful reality of narcissistic behavior, understanding their defense mechanisms, the fragile core of their self-image, and their almost impenetrable resistance to genuine self-awareness, the critical and most personal question emerges. What do you do now? How do you reclaim your life and rebuild your sense of self when someone you care about is trapped in this endless cycle of denial and emotional harm? The first and most crucial truth to embrace is this: you cannot fix the narcissist. No amount of empathy, patience, carefully crafted conversations, or hope will change the fact that real transformation demands a willingness to confront deep vulnerability, a price most narcissists are unwilling or unable to pay. Their psychological survival depends on maintaining their defensive walls, avoiding any crack that might allow genuine self-reflection. This realization, while painful, is also deeply empowering. It shifts your focus from trying to change someone else to taking care of yourself. Instead of exhausting your energy in a rescue mission destined to face repeated setbacks, you begin to channel that energy into cultivating clarity and erecting boundaries. Clarity is your foundation. It's about seeing the narcissist and the relationship for what they truly are, not through the rose-colored lens of hope or denial. This means recognizing the limits of what they can offer emotionally and understanding that their harmful behaviors are not your fault. Clarity dissolves confusion, guilt, and self-blame, freeing you from the exhausting spiral of trying to rationalize or justify their actions. This clarity doesn't come easily. Narcissistic relationships are built on a foundation of manipulation, gaslighting, and shifting realities. They warp your perception of what's normal and what's acceptable. Gaining clarity requires stepping back, often with external support such as therapy or trusted friends, to view the situation from an objective vantage point. Once clarity is established, boundaries become your most potent tool. Boundaries are the practical and emotional lines you draw to protect your time, energy, and self-worth. They define what behavior you will no longer accept and the consequences for crossing those lines. Setting boundaries is not an act of punishment. It's an act of radical self-respect and preservation. Examples of boundaries include limiting or cutting off contact, refusing to engage in manipulative or emotionally abusive interactions, and refusing to tolerate gaslighting or blame shifting. Boundaries can be physical, emotional, digital, or social, depending on your situation. They are the armor that guards your fragile self from further harm. Many people struggle with boundaries because narcissists often respond with charm, guilt-tripping, or even aggression when confronted. But maintaining boundaries consistently is crucial. Wavering only invites more boundary violations and emotional turmoil. Remember, boundaries are a declaration that your well-being matters above all. Acceptance is the next vital step. Acceptance doesn't mean approval or resignation. Instead, it's a deeply compassionate acknowledgement of reality. Acknowledging that the narcissist may never change and that your hope for them can be a source of ongoing pain rather than healing. Acceptance involves grieving the loss of the fantasy you held onto, the idea of who the narcissist could be, the relationship you hoped for, and the potential for shared happiness. This grief is a natural and necessary part of healing. It's the emotional process that clears the way for new growth and freedom. The pain of this loss can be intense, especially if you invested years or decades into the relationship. But resisting this grief often leads to stagnation, keeping you tethered to hope that may never materialize. From acceptance emerges self-liberation. Self-liberation is reclaiming your power to heal, grow, and reconstruct your identity independently of the narcissist's influence. It requires patience and kindness towards yourself, recognizing that healing from narcissistic abuse is neither quick nor linear. You may carry emotional scars, but those scars do not define you. They are marks of your resilience and survival. Rebuilding your identity is a profound journey. Narcissistic relationships often distort your self-view, leaving you doubting your worth, intuition, and reality. Self-liberation involves reconnecting with your values, passions, and truths outside the narcissist's shadow. It means cultivating a robust, grounded sense of self that is no longer dependent on their validation or approval. Practical steps to foster this identity include engaging in therapy to unpack trauma and develop coping skills, practicing mindfulness and meditation to cultivate presence and self-compassion, journaling to process emotions and track your healing journey, joining support groups where you can share experiences and gain validation, reinvesting in hobbies, interests, and relationships that affirm your authentic self. Healing also involves learning to recognize narcissistic patterns early in future relationships. Equipped with this knowledge, you build foresight and intuition that help you avoid repeating destructive cycles. This protective awareness is empowering and crucial for building healthier connections. The path to healing is rarely smooth. You may face setbacks, moments of doubt, or lingering pain. This is normal. Healing is a process, not a destination. Each step you take toward clarity, boundary setting, and self-care builds momentum for transformation. Importantly, healing means changing your relationship to the narcissistic experience, not the narcissists themselves. It means releasing the exhausting cycle of waiting for apologies that never come, and stopping the sacrifice of your peace for the illusion of potential. The power to heal and move forward rests with you. It begins with acceptance, flourishes with self-compassion, and grows through courageous action. Your life is yours to live, free from the chains of denial and defenses constructed by another. Summary of core insights. Transformation in a narcissist is rare and requires their willingness, which is often absent. Your focus must shift from fixing them to gaining clarity and establishing firm boundaries. Boundaries protect your mental and emotional health and assert your right to respect. Grieving the loss of the idealized relationship frees you from harmful hope. Rebuilding your identity independent of the narcissist is key to healing. Therapy, mindfulness, journaling, and support groups are invaluable tools on this journey. Recognizing narcissistic traits early prevents future emotional harm. Healing is ongoing with ups and downs, but it leads to real empowerment. Your power lies in changing your story, not theirs.